This is a rebuttal to Israel Finkelstein's idea that Solomon and David were mythical. He does effectively claim that the buildings built by Solomon occur in the early 9th century, and I agree with him there. That's where the archaeological evidence is, that's where the RC14 dating evidence is, but that is also where the astronomical evidence is now. The 709 BCE eclipse is the actual original dating for the Assyrian period eclipse, but the 763 BC eclipse is an error, and so I'm going to examine details on in that regard. One of the issues is that the 763 BC eclipse is actually too early. This is a quote from Wikipedia about this. It talks about this famous solar eclipse that dates the Assyrian period. It says a solar eclipse at this date, the month of Sivan, which is the third month, is used to fix the chronology of the ancient Near East. However, it should be noted that it requires Nisan 1 to fall on March 20th, 763 BCE, which was 8 to 9 days before the vernal equinox. And the Babylonians never started their calendar year before the spring equinox. Of course, they actually did sometimes, but it was not the common custom. So this is an interesting observation on the 763 BC eclipse not being the customarily dated eclipse time. Next, we should note that the 709 BCE eclipse and the 763 BC eclipse were part of a rare series of predictable eclipses, 3 of which occurred in Assyria, and they were 54 years and 1 month apart. And what you're looking at is a rough schematic of those eclipses that started from the south pole and graduated up toward the North Pole in that interval, and approximately 13 to 16 degrees farther north every time the eclipse happened in that series. This gives you all the dates of these eclipses, these 7 eclipses, and note that they graduate every 1 month. February, March, April, May, June, July, and August. So they are in order every 54 years and 1 month apart. Therefore, if we can confirm the dating of any one of them that is specific to a month, we can establish the pattern for the entire series. In this regard, the 871 BCE eclipse dates the entire series because it must be dated to month 12. That's because the full moon occurs before the equinox. The equinox occurs on the 29th. The full moon occurs on the 28th. So because the full moon occurs before the equinox, this month must be dated to month 12. The option to date the year early only was considered if the full moon, which was Passover for the Jews, occurred after the actual solar year began, which began with the vernal equinox. Once we establish this, we can see that the pattern of month 12 in 871 leads to month 3, the month of Sivan, the month of the eclipse, occurs in 709 if this series is to be acknowledged as a 54-year 1 month pattern. Thus, as you can see, when month 3 is assigned to 763 BCE, it is out of sync with the rest of the pattern. The normal month 3 in this pattern would have been in 709 BCE, which points to 709 BCE as the more logical original date for this eclipse. Another reason for considering the 709 BCE eclipse is because it's the logical predictable eclipse. It's the third in a series that we've seen of these eclipses. This eclipse appears in the Assyrian eponym, which briefly lists only major events for each year. A predicted eclipse would explain why it became a memorable civic event. This is the only eclipse mentioned in the eponym. What made this eclipse so special? Because it was predicted. And now for a little fun, we're going to look at some simulations of those eclipses that were seen by those ancients. The eclipses in question are three eclipses, one in 817, one in 763, and one in 709. The 817 and the 763 eclipses, 54 years, 1 month apart, would have been able to inspire a prediction for the location and time of the 709 BCE eclipse. So we're going to look at their subjective experience. If that eclipse was in fact predicted, then it would have made a major event, a civic event, and that is why it was memorialized in the Assyrian eponym list. Here we have a comparison of the eclipse tracks at the top, with Assyria being that yellow box equivalent, and at the bottom we see what they actually would have seen looking up at the sky as these three eclipses occurred over their area every 54 years and 1 month apart. As you can see, the 817 BCE eclipse occurs slightly below, and it was seen as approximately 50% eclipse, covering one side of the sun, probably the bottom of the sun as they saw it. The next eclipse, the 763 BC eclipse, goes right through Assyria. It was a total eclipse. And the 709 BC eclipse, though, was slightly above there. And they would have seen the shadow of the moon approximately 50% covering the surface of the sun. But on the opposite side of the previous eclipse in 817 BCE, these combinations should have hinted to them exactly where and when the eclipse occurred in 709 BCE, which would have made it a major event, and that's why it would have been an ideal reference in the civic reference in the eponym. And now for a little fun animation, we're going to look at each of these eclipses as they might have seen them. This is the 817 BCE eclipse, probably seen crossing over the bottom half of the sun, approximately 50% eclipse. It's a rather strong eclipse. There you go, that's probably the maximum phase. The next eclipse was 763 BCE, but this was the second eclipse that they saw 54 years and 1 month apart, which is extremely rare. So this would have alerted them to perhaps this pattern that they were in. They would have anticipated the 709 BCE eclipse, the precise year and month, and if they compared the distances between the total eclipse tracks, they could have also predicted the general location of where the total eclipse tracks would have occurred again. Again, the moon covers the top half of the sun, the opposite side of the 817 BCE eclipse, and that is the elements of predictability that the Assyrians would have known about. So we're going to look at the maximal phases right now. There's 1, 2, and 3. That's how those eclipses occurred over Assyria. Of course, now the question is, why do Assyriologists and archaeologists use 763, continue to use it, to date the Assyrian period instead of 709 BCE? Obviously, it has to do with the strength of the Neo-Babylonian timeline, which now has been challenged and overturned because of the VAT 4956. But there is an opportunity to use the 763 BCE eclipse rather than the 709 BCE eclipse, because you have the option to date it in month 2 or month 3, because the full moon happens after the equinox. The VAT 4956, though, contains 2 dates, both revised and original, of year 37 of Nebuchadnezzar II, 568 and 511. This establishes the 57-year discrepancy during the Neo-Babylonian period, the revision, but also the correction, and that 511 BC original dating is what lines up with the 709 BCE eclipse. I'm going to continue to challenge Israel Finkelstein on this issue in part 2, which I will deal with the radiocarbon 14 dating from Rehov, which also agrees completely with the 709 BCE eclipse in part 2.